There is a structure in there are structures in every cell in the body that play a dominant role in how much muscle you keep, especially how much muscle you maintain with age, how you prevent a number of different diseases, and also how much energy you have. What I'm talking about is called the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria have a interesting history because they think that what happened was eons ago in the primordial soup, as it's called, when life was first developing on Earth, a primitive bacteria somehow slipped into let's say, an animal or early life form cell and stayed there. And this primitive bacteria formed what they call in science a symbiotic relationship. It stayed in the cell, and it's still in the cell today, and it's essential to keep that cell alive. And these are called mitochondria. Each cell has about, if I remember correctly, about 250 mitochondria, and they have several functions, but probably the chief function is the production of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is the most elemental form of energy. All the calories you eat, no matter where they come from, whether it's a carbohydrate, fat, protein, eventually they break glucose itself. They eventually are broken down into ATP. ATP, again, is the most elemental form of energy. Unfortunately, it only lasts for about 6 seconds. However, there is a backup system in muscle, for example, to regenerate. When ATP, I should explain, ATP releases energy. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, which indicates there's three phosphates attached to an adenosine molecule. Energy is released when one of the phosphate bonds break off the adenosine molecule, and that breaking off releases energy. That's how ATP produces energy. However, you're left with something called ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, which doesn't contribute as much energy. However, creatine, which is stored in muscle in a form mostly as stored with a mineral phosphate, but there's also free creatine in muscle. The creatine contributes phosphate to the depleted ATP and regenerates it. And this itself is what makes creatine such a great supplement, because it regenerates ATP. Now, there's a couple of interesting things about ATP. ATP, I'm talking about mitochondria. The ATP is probably the dominant work performed by the mitochondria, but also the mitochondria is the site of fat burning. Fat oxidation is called beta oxidation, also occurs in the mitochondria. The mitochondria is a tremendous amount of energy occurs in the mitochondria, and unfortunately, as a byproduct of processing oxygen in the mitochondria, you have a huge production of what they call reactive oxygen species, or free radicals. These are famous for attacking cell membranes, free radical, blah, blah, blah. You probably heard of antioxidants. Antioxidants work by helping to quench free radicals, or ROS, reactive oxygen species. The body has its own endogenous antioxidant system, consisting of proteins like glutathione, superoxide dismutase, catalase, and a couple of others that actually help to break down or neutralize the damaging effects of free radicals. I don't want to talk about free radicals here, though. I want to talk about mitochondria. So mitochondria, one of the dominant theories, there's many causes of aging, let me put it this way. And one of the theories of aging is that as we get older, we progressively lose mitochondria. You could look at mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell. It's the part of the cell that supplies energy for things like cell replication, cell repair, etc. As the mitochondria blank out over the years, the cell things happen like the telomeres, which are these little strings on the end of chromosomes. The oxidation builds up and they get shorter and shorter. Eventually the cell stops replicating, becomes senescent. you get it's a whole complex. Then you get this huge amount of inflammatory chemicals released by the senescent cells that causes a number of diseases, so on and so forth. But the thing is, mitochondria are extremely important. Various brain diseases are related to mitochondria. Some of the diseases that are thought to be related to mitochondrial dysfunction include premature aging or faster aging, the disease amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or so-called Lou Gehrig's disease, which the scientists, what's the name of that guy? The guy who was in the wheelchair, the physicist Stephen Hawking, he had that disease. Lou Gehrig, strangely enough, did not have that disease, even though it's called Lou Gehrig disease. That's a whole different story. Mitochondrial dysfunctions is also related to Alzheimer's disease, autism, cardiovascular disease, chronic fatigue, dementia, diabetes, Huntington's disease, migraines, and Parkinson's disease. So it affects a whole bunch of things. As I said, the brain is particularly affected by mitochondrial dysfunction because the brain uses 70% of the ATP that's produced in the mitochondria. The brain is a glucose ATP hog. It uses 25 something or 35% of all the energy produced in the body. As I said, the ATP is produced in the mitochondria in a process called the electron transport chain. This is where 90% of ATP is produced during what they call aerobic metabolism involving oxygen. It gets complicated. This thing's ATP production involves something called the Krebs citric acid cycle, which I won't even begin to try and explain. Don't take my word for it. Look up a diagram of the Krebs cycle. Everybody who studies biochemistry in college has to memorize the citric acid cycle. I'm not even going to talk about that, but that's where ATP is produced in the mitochondria. There's several nutrients that are important for ATP production in the mitochondria. For example, the beta oxidation of fat, or oxidation of fat, requires an enzyme called FAD, which is turned on by a B-complex vitamin called riboflavin, or vitamin B2. You also need niacin to oxidize fat, because niacin is needed to turn on a protein called NADH, nicotinamide adenine dehydrate something or other. I don't remember. Coenzyme Q10 is important for the electron transport system and energy production. And of course, you need carnitine to transport fatty acids, short-chain fatty acids, into mitochondria. Without carnitine, your body cannot burn fat. For the citric acid cycle that produces ATP, you have to have enough iron, magnesium, manganese. They function as coenzymes. You have to have B1 thiamine, B2, which is again riboflavin, niacin, and you have to have cysteine, because cysteine is needed for the very important antioxidant which helps protect mitochondria, called glutathione. As a matter of fact, they recently came out with a study of older people. They showed that a combination of N-acetylcysteine and the amino acid glycine, they call it NAC-like or something like that, galacnic. I can't. Anyway, it's NAC combined with the amino acid glycine. It was able to almost completely regenerate mitochondria in older people, which would have a tremendous effect on aging. Years ago, a study by a renowned scientist from the University of California, Berkeley, I can't remember his name offhand, but he found that a combination of L-acetylcarnitine and alpha-lipoic acid also was able to regenerate brain mitochondria. Both of them get into they're able to get past the protective blood-brain barrier. They regenerate mitochondria. Now, it's very important. There's a process called autophagy. Those of you who are involved with intermittent fasting are familiar. One of the features of intermittent fasting, or fasting in general, is autophagy, which basically involves a house cleaning where the body gets rid of old senescent cells, kind of regenerates itself, including the immune system. Well, it turns out that for maximal mitochondrial health, the mitochondria itself have to get rid of old or damaged mitochondria. That this is called mitophagy. And if mitophagy is efficient, you have much healthier mitochondria, which means you have more energy, you look better, you age less, you age much less, your skin looks better, you're able to train harder, and you're able to maintain a much more youthful state. Now, they recently discovered that there's a substance in pomegranate, especially in pomegranate and other fruits, but especially in pomegranate, called ellagic acid. Now, ellagic acid, when it's ingested, the bacteria that's found in the intestinal microbiome is able to convert ellagic acid into a substance called urolithin A. Urolithin, only 33% of people, however, have the right type of bacteria in the intestinal microbiome to convert ellagic acid into urolithin A. However, they recently came out with urolithin A supplements, and I got to tell you, there's been a couple of studies that have showed that it has tremendous effects at promoting mitophagy or the maintenance of mitochondria. The bad part is that these urolithin A supplements are only made by one company, and as a result, it's extremely expensive. It costs something like $100 a month. But it does seem to work. But I should also point out that let's say 5 or so human studies that have shown that urolithin A supplements regenerate mitochondria have all been sponsored by the company that sells urolithin A. So take that with a grain of salt, as they say. However, you could stimulate mitochondria genesis, or formation of new mitochondria, very simply by exercising. They used to think that only aerobic training, in other words, taking a lot of oxygen, stimulated the formation of new mitochondria, because it stimulates a protein called PGC1A, which is the master controller of mitochondrial genesis. However, more recent studies in the past 2 or 3 years have shown that weight training can also stimulate mitochondrial genesis. So you want to do both, aerobic training and weight training. And by the way, the weight training that stimulates mitochondria will have to be not this stuff where you do a set and play with your cell phone for 20 minutes, taking long rests. That's not going to stimulate mitochondria. To stimulate mitochondria resistance exercise, you can't rest more than 1 or 2 minutes at the most. You got to keep going. Otherwise, you get no mitochondrial benefit whatsoever. So you can, again, at any age, you could stimulate mitochondrial formation, which has tremendous effects on health, simply by exercising. Conversely, when you don't exercise, when you're sedentary, I've said this in past videos, the body works on a use it or lose it principle. Anything that you don't use in the body disappears, whether it's muscle or brain cells, you name it. Same with mitochondria. If you're not active, you don't move, you don't work out, mitochondria check out. They kind of disappear, and as they disappear, you're going to get more and more diseases, sicker and sicker, and you're going to get older and older. So exercise is absolutely essential. Now, there are certain things that are known to damage mitochondria. Excess oxidation, for example, as I mentioned, the mitochondria are the source, is the site of ATP production. But however, in producing ATP, a huge amount of oxygen circulates through the mitochondria. As a consequence of that, you get the mitochondria is the greatest producer of free radicals or reactive oxygen species. Unfortunately, and the mitochondria does have built-in antioxidants to kind of minimize oxidative damage. Otherwise, we'd all be dead very fast. These include glutathione, coenzyme Q10, and others. However, sometimes it's possible for the mitochondria, especially as you get older, the antioxidant system within the mitochondria isn't as efficient, and that leads to mitochondria damage and destruction of mitochondria. So you want to take in certain antibiotics. Antioxidants will help. As I said, NAC, also lipoic acid is very effective for that. And also coenzyme Q10 is especially useful. However, coenzyme Q10 is very hard to absorb orally. You have to take it with a form, you have to take it with fat at all times. There are supplemental forms of coenzyme Q10 that are water and fat soluble. I use one myself. You get a little bit more coenzyme Q10 activity when you use that. Aging itself causes damage to, now this is interesting, mitochondria have their own DNA that's separate from cellular DNA. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. That's involved in cell replication and maintenance. However, the mitochondria, it's almost like it's a separate portion of the cell. It has its own mitochondrial DNA. As a matter of fact, you inherit your mitochondrial DNA from your mother, not your father. And you know, mitochondrial DNA is related to longevity. So a lot of your longevity is related to the mitochondrial DNA that you inherited from your mother. Now, unfortunately, aging also causes accumulated oxidative damage to the mitochondrial DNA, and that could cause, again, the destruction of DNA. Toxic metals, cadmium, stuff like that you get from, let's say, air pollution, smoking, damaging to mitochondria. Persistent organic pollutants that are stuff that's found in certain types of fish, mercury, that kind of stuff, damaging to mitochondria. Certain prescription drugs, alcohol is very damaging to mitochondria. Certain drugs can damage mitochondria. Tylenol, acetoaminophen, Tylenol can damage mitochondria. Antibiotics are very damaging to mitochondria. Aspirin is damaging to mitochondria. As a matter of fact, aspirin actually in the mitochondria, it uncouples oxidative phosphorylation. That's a fancy term for the oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative phosphorylation is the production of energy as ATP in the mitochondria, and aspirin actually uncouples it. And another thing that does that is DNP, which is a drug. I'm not going to get into it, but by uncoupling my oxidative phosphorylation, DNP can cause a tremendous burning of fat. Cocaine can damage mitochondria. Methamphetamine damages it. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, even statin drugs that are used to treat heart disease can damage it. Again, the nutrients, as I said, the antioxidant protective nutrients are very important. So what you want to do is you want to optimize nutrient status to limit oxygen and high energy electron leakage, and you want to decrease toxygen exposure. Provide nutrients that protect the mitochondria from oxidative stress, which I've mentioned a couple of them here. You want to utilize nutrients that facilitate mitochondrial ATP production. One of them that really stands out is something called PQQ, which I've written about in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. PQQ has a tremendous effect at stimulating mitochondrial genesis. It helps, the studies of humans showed it increases cognition, thinking ability, it slows the aging process. Again, a little bit on the expensive side, but it really does work. And it works by stimulating that stuff called PGC1A, which I mentioned earlier. Also, as I said, the more muscle you build through exercise, the more mitochondria you're going to build. Exercise, both aerobics and weight resistant exercise, are absolutely critical to maintain mitochondria and develop new mitochondria. Other nutrients that might help include resveratrol, vitamin E because of its antioxidant action, and I mentioned PQQ. Ginkgo biloba as an herb helps a little bit. Proanthocyanins that's found in grapeseed extract. Melatonin helps also with mitochondrial health. So I think that's about it. What I'm going to cover here in this video about mitochondria. They're extremely important. Again, the more efficient your mitochondria, keep this in mind, the more efficient your mitochondria, the more energy you're going to have, the better you're going to look. Oh, by the way, since fat oxidation occurs in the mitochondria, the more efficient your mitochondria are, the greater your ability to burn fat. In fact, athletes, they have the mitochondria are situated in the muscle in a way that facilitates increased fat oxidation. In other words, as you work out, you get this type of change in the muscle cells. Hard to explain, really, but let's say that the mitochondria becomes closer to the blood vessels within the muscle, and this allows greater access to the fatty acids, allows them to be burnt more efficiently. So the greater your mitochondrial health, the more fat you could burn, and you'll avoid most major diseases if your mitochondria are healthy. And conversely, if your mitochondria are not healthy, you're going to be very sick, and you're going to prematurely die of many, you're open to many different diseases. I'm going to have much more on mitochondria in my Applied Metabolics publication. I only covered the surface here. There's much more information about mitochondria that it would take too long to talk about in a video. In fact, if I were to talk about all the data that I have on mitochondria, we'd probably have about an 8-hour video, which I don't think would interest anybody. Even the people that watch Joe Rogan would probably fall asleep. Anyway, but that's another story. Anyway, if you want more information on nutrition, exercise science, anti-aging research, effective fat loss techniques, ergogenic aids, hormonal therapy, women's health and fitness, supplement science, which ones work, which ones don't. All of this is covered in my Applied Metabolics publication, 40 to 50 pages every month, www.appliedmetabolics.com. When you subscribe, I'll send you an invitation to join my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page, where each month I post new information on exercise, nutrition, and general medicine. Each day, I should say, I post new information. That's only for current subscribers. I have an email portal on my Applied Metabolics webpage, where current subscribers only are welcome to send me short questions about anything they might have read in Applied Metabolics, or anything that comes to mind about nutrition, exercise. I will answer current subscribers only, because it's kind of a bonus. I appreciate you supporting my work, so I will answer your questions. Obviously, that doesn't apply to people that aren't subscribers. I'm not going to answer the questions, because I only have a limited amount of time, and I'm going to give that time I have to current subscribers only. So that's about it. If you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, go to your local shelter, adopt a dog, and thank you for listening. And don't forget the mitochondria. They're all important. Believe me, they'll make a huge difference.